What's happening, everybody? On today's show, we are going to get into around the conference with some tidbits going on around SEC spring football. We got some news from Texas A&M. We got some news at LSU, Florida, Arkansas, among others. Also, some SEC basketball news as well. The Texas A&M Aggies going for the NIT title tonight up in Madison Square Garden. Also, we're going to catch up with our buddy Dan Mathews, executive producer on the Chuck Oliver Show. We'll talk all things SEC with him. He's close to the football program at Georgia. Get his thoughts on Georgia spring football leading up to G-Day as well. All of that coming your way right now. Locked On SEC starts right now.
You are Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome into Locked On SEC. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines more than ever before. BetOnline, it is where the game starts. I'm Chris Gordy. Thank you guys so much for making us your first listen every day. And as a reminder, you can find the show wherever you get your podcasts, as well as up on YouTube for the video version of the show. Let's jump into it. Plenty to discuss. Let's go around the conference.
Boots out to the right. Intercepted.
Takes the handoff.
What a catch!
Around the conference.
And we start over at Texas A&M as A&M's tight end Baylor Cupp, who was a big part of their 2019 recruiting class, five-star tight end. Injuries have been a big problem for him his first 2 years of College Station, and apparently he is going to explore his options. According to 24/7 Sports, Baylor Cupp has entered his name into the transfer portal. In his 10 games in 2021, Cupp did not record a catch. He was credited with a start against Prairie View A&M. He was the number one tight end in the class of 2019, number 53 player overall, according to 24/7 Sports. So we will see where Baylor Cupp ends up, but he is on the way out the door at A&M. Meanwhile, over at LSU, they're going through their first spring practice of the Brian Kelly era, and that means players starting to figure out where they are on the depth chart. And one guy entering his name into the transfer portal, former walk-on safety, according to 24/7 Sports, Pig Cage is entering the transfer portal. Great name. How he doesn't end up at Arkansas, I don't know, but Cage appeared in 2 games for LSU last year, was productive, recorded 7 tackles and a sack. He was a transfer from Nicholls State, so we'll see where he ends up. But man, Arkansas, Sam Pittman, get on the phone. Pig Cage needs to be a Razorback. Meanwhile, over at Florida, Billy Napier continuing with their spring practices, and Brenton Cox, part of their defense. He has set a big goal for himself going into this year. The Florida pass rusher, talking about Alex Brown's program sack record of 13 back in 1999. He said, look, I can't make all the plays, but the ones that I could have gone harder. I can honestly say I took off a couple plays, but I'm here to make up for that. And he wants to break the sack record. Now, after he dealt with that foot injury last year, Cox says he's ready for a strong year. I'm going for a sack every half, a sack a game, or a sack a half. Either way, I've got to get it. Cox had 8.5 sacks last season, 4 in 2020. Outside linebackers coach Mike Peterson said Cox has all the skills. Maybe he can break that sack record, but certainly it's a great goal. I always like to hear guys saying, setting the goal high for themselves, and I want to break those records. Meanwhile, over at Arkansas, Sam Pittman coming up with a new wrinkle in their offense under Kendall Briles. Quarterback Malik Hornsby taking some snaps at wide receiver, and by all indications, a lot of people like the move. Sam Pittman talked about the move earlier this week in an interview, and reporters did see Hornsby in the new role at practice, but putting Hornsby and KJ Jefferson on the same field at the same time going to give the defenses a lot to think about, and also appears to be a popular move in the locker room. Running back A.J. Green and defensive back Kari Johnson both talked about it. Johnson calls Hornsby the Swiss Army knife. Said he's got speed of a top caliber skill player. I'm just excited for him. Wherever you put him in this offense, he is an explosive talent. So interesting to see Malik Hornsby getting on the field with KJ Jefferson, with Hornsby at wide receiver. That'll be a fun wrinkle to see at Arkansas this year. Over at Kentucky, Rashawn Lewis, he was charged with a DUI, improper start from a park position, and reckless driving Sunday morning in Lexington. He participated in a spring football practice Tuesday morning, open to the media. He's a walk-on, played in 6 games for Kentucky last season, had 2 catches for 4 yards. He also returned a punt for 12 yards. Had a knee injury that slowed him down last year, but made his first college catch against Louisiana Monroe and had a catch against Louisville. Lewis previously played at Central Florida and FAU before transferring to Kentucky. The Courier-Journal in Kentucky says that Lewis accelerated his vehicle from a traffic light in downtown Lexington so quickly it created a burnout. He then accelerated to a speed around 65 miles per hour in a 35 mile per hour zone. A UK spokesperson said the school is aware of the incident and will continue to monitor it as it develops. Going back to Texas A&M, Jimbo Fisher talking about A&M and what he has seen out of the team so far, and says, look, halfway through the spring right now, we need to find some more consistency. Hopefully we can push through those bangs and bruises that we have right now. But Fisher also mentioned some of the newcomers, Anthony Lucas, Evan Stewart, Connor Weigman, the quarterback. Says they're all bright spots so far. He said a few of the early enrollees have been nicked up and missed the scrimmage. The ones that did play, I was very pleased with. They're making some mistakes, of course, but I love the way that they went about it. Fisher also added that Amari Daniels did well with the ball, but like a lot of backs, needs to improve without the ball, work on his blocking and route running. In some SEC hoops news, Alabama, of course, looking to rebuild next year under Nate Oates. A couple of guys entering the transfer portal already, and Alex Chiku, Jaden Quinterly, and Keon Ambrose Hilton. Now another guy joining that group, Jason Holt, announced on Instagram he is entering the portal. He was a freshman guard this year, appeared in 22 games for Alabama, scored 15 points, had 35 total rebounds. So we'll see where he ends up. Meanwhile, at LSU, the exodus continues with Will Wade out, Matt McMahon in. On Wednesday, Bradley Ezewiro entered the portal. He became the 6th LSU player to enter his name in the portal. He appeared in 7 games this past season. It's a 3-star signee in LSU's 2021 class. Now, some good news for new head coach Matt McMahon. One of his familiar faces from Murray State is going to follow him over to LSU. Point guard Justice Hill announced on Twitter he is transferring to LSU. He appeared in 34 games for Murray State last year, started all of them, averaged over 13 points, 5 assists, and 2 rebounds, and 1 steal per game. So Justice Hill coming to LSU. So at least they've got him in the bank for next year. Over in Florida, Todd Golden taking over as men's basketball coach, putting his staff together. On Wednesday, it was announced he's hiring Corey McCray as associate head coach. McCray spent the past 7 years on Ben Howland's staff at Mississippi State. Prior to that, he worked at UCLA, LSU, among others. And lastly, at Mississippi State, Chris Jans, he's putting together his staff. He's hiring James Miller, who spent the last 4 seasons at New Mexico State, working under Jans after being elevated from assistant coach to associate head coach. Before New Mexico, Miller had worked at Omaha, North Texas, and Arkansas State. So a lot of the new coaches in SEC basketball putting their staffs together. And there you have it. That is the latest around the conference. Coming up next, we are going to talk all things SEC football, including the Georgia Bulldogs with our buddy Dan Mathews. That right after we tell you about, of course, Athletic Greens. We told you about Athletic Greens last week. If you want to start taking your body a little bit more seriously, you need to go check out our friends at Athletic Greens. What is this stuff? Well, with one delicious scoop of AG1, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens. It will help you start your day off right. Basically, when you look at it, it costs you less than $3 a day. You're investing in your health, and it's cheaper than perhaps your coffee habit. It is cheaper than getting all the different supplements yourself. You're investing in an all-in-one nutritional insurance. They've made it easy for you. Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is go to athleticgreens.com/college. Right now, it is time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition. It's just 1 scoop in a cup of water every day. That's it. No need to take a million different pills and supplements to look out for your health. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/college. Take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance, Athletic Greens. Of course, Stat Hero making the NCAA college basketball watching a lot more entertaining, not just doing the brackets and all that. Stat Hero, they've got lineups in addition to their pick'em games. You have dozens of lineups you can comb through and pick on who you want to take head to head. Basically, they simply set posts of players that you take on with a set of players that you choose. Stat Hero, it is the easiest and fastest way to get your sports action fix. It is simple, sleek gameplay that will have you playing within minutes. It is what daily fantasy was meant to be. Go check them out right now. You can sign up for free at stathero.com/lockedon. And when you sign up, make sure you use our promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON. That's going to get you a 100% deposit match. stathero.com/lockedon. Use our promo code LOCKEDON. Again, get a 100% match. stathero.com/lockedon, promo code LOCKEDON. Terms and conditions apply. Make watching those games this weekend way more entertaining since your brackets are busted. Go to stathero.com/lockedon. Brought along here, Locked On SEC, and one of our favorite guys to talk to when it comes to SEC, a guy who lives in Atlanta, covers the Georgia Bulldogs, roots for LSU, roots for Georgia, covers the SEC as a whole, gets to work with Chuck Oliver on a daily basis, gets to work on the Saturday Down South College Football Uncensored podcast. This guy's doing it all. And we love talking all things SEC with our buddy Dan Mathews, and he joins us right now. What's going on, man? As far as, let's start with Georgia, because I know they're into their spring practices. Everybody else is into their spring practices. Missouri, obviously, they were the weirdos. They started real early and got their spring game out of the way, and they're done now. But what are you hearing? What's the biggest story coming out of Georgia camp so far?
Well, I guess, it's only a few months removed from a national championship. And, of course, questions need to be asked about Stetson Bennett and the quarterback position and where necessarily things stand there. But that seemingly is another thing that's being talked about right now. It sounds like a guy that a lot of people thought was going to be the quarterback after JT Daniels got hurt last year, Carson Beck, has started to make some serious strides. Hearing a lot about Xavier Truss as well, a guy that was a backup offensive lineman last year. So a lot of really good players that they're losing from last year's team that now are going to get to make an impact. And look, there was not too long ago at Georgia where you didn't have 4- and 5-star guys sitting on the bench or getting sparing playing time in their first couple of seasons. Now you're kind of starting to see that. And the only other place we really seen that in the SEC is Alabama.
Yeah, the interesting part, Dan, is I've been reading up on what's going on with Georgia and looking at the depth chart and everything. And look, they're reloading. I mean, it's not a rebuild; it's a reload. It's a lot. They lose a lot, but man, they've got a lot already on that roster. And the one position that stood out to me is wide receiver. I mean, yeah, you lose a couple pieces that had transferred here and transferred there, but Adonai Mitchell was so good last year. As a freshman. Curious Jackson's still hanging around. And then Dominic Blaylock, there was a big story on him this past day or past week. Like Dominic Blaylock is a guy we kind of forget about who, I kind of like this receiving core for Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, though, that you mentioned that because it wasn't too long ago that Kirby Smart, when he was talking with the media, said the numbers at receiver and defensive back, the smallest they've ever been in the 7 years they've been on campus. And I think that that's a little bit of an interesting fact to point out. I do agree, in terms of them needing to up at least the talent level in that group. I mean, you do get Curious Jackson back. I believe you mentioned him. Dominic Blaylock is kind of the forgotten guy. And there's also thought that Eric Gilbert is going to get some run at receiver. I do expect that they probably will be in the market in the portal in April, May, early in the June, before that July 1st deadline. But here's the other thing is, too, that I tell people about Georgia's wide receiver group is that Bryan Mcclendon is here for a reason now. Now, we saw Cortez Hankton leave and take the job at LSU. He's one of the highest paid at his position group in college football. Bryan Mcclendon's not too far behind him. I believe Football Scoop had him at about $700,000 a season. This is a guy who, if I'm not mistaken, gave up at least a co-coordinator spot at Miami in order to get this job at Georgia and return to a place that he started his coaching career and that he was a player at and all those different types of things. He's known as a very dynamic recruiter. And I think that Kirby Smart realizes that that is the position group that he's really missing out on. I mean, people always wonder, why does Kirby Smart continue to get top-tier quarterbacks to commit to this school, and then he plays a guy like Stetson Bennett? He hasn't had a problem with quarterbacks. His problem has been being able to not only get top-tier talent, but seeing that top-tier talent at the group be able to play itself out, or in the case of Jermaine Burton, top-tier talent leaving your program.
It's interesting on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, there's a lot of familiar names back. I was talking with somebody, they were just surprised by how many Bulldogs names are popping up in the first round of this year's draft, on all the mock drafts. And I said, well, the best one of them all, maybe next year, Jalen Carter, number 88, that had such a big impact. And I mean, I think people are already penciling him in as a top 5 pick next year, but having him, and then another guy I've heard a lot about is Small Munden, who a lot of people are saying, man, like Georgia with the linebacker spot is just, they're always going to have good linebackers. You just become so accustomed to it. But what are you hearing about the defense? I mean, again, you lose a lot, but man, It just feels like they're going to be dominant as always.
Yeah, Smile Munden is a guy that you mentioned there. A lot of people are really looking forward to what he could possibly do at a linebacker group that's losing, at least on the surface, 2 very good players in Nakobe Dean and Channing Tindall. So that's going to be huge shoes for him to be able to fill. I think on the back end, having Christopher Smith is pretty big for them because, you're only as strong on a defense as you are up the middle. And he was a very good safety for them last season. I would not be surprised if maybe Kirby has to go in the transfer portal again because, we saw Darian Kendrick come in last year. We'll see what Tyke Smith, if indeed he can get on the field this year, the former West Virginia transfer, and he can make an impact on this team. I think William Poole was somebody who at times had an up and down year last year, but now he's going to get an opportunity to be able to show that he belongs on the field. So, I think that's going to be huge for him as well. On the defensive front, kind of like what I was talking about with receiver, that's what I think gives you hope if you're a Georgia fan, is that things can turn around. Just because something hasn't been a strength for you in the past doesn't mean it can't be for you in the future. We're starting to see that with the defensive line group. I mean, you mentioned Jalen Carter coming back and all the players you're missing from last year's team. I mean, people thinking that Trayvon Walker can be a top pick in this draft, maybe the top pick in this draft. We'll have to see how that plays out. I mean, Devontae Wyatt, another guy that was a huge standout for them last year on this team. And, the same deal, of course, I hadn't even gotten to Jordan Davis yet as well. So, they've done a fantastic job being able to recruit that position. And, that's something too as well. I don't think they're going to be devoid of talent on that side of the ball. They're just going to be devoid of experience. And it's going to be interesting to see how well that talent can be able to match the lack of experience pretty quickly, because you get a tough one right out of the gate against Dan Lanning's Oregon Ducks.
Just one second, Dan, because I do want to get into a couple of broader SEC topics with you in just a second. But first, let me remind our listeners about Built Bar. It's that time of year where a lot of us have given up on our New Year's resolutions. It is always a good option to go with Built Bar. And, when you got cravings in the afternoon, you're reaching for those potato chips or candy bars, Built Bar is a much healthier option. Many Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams sugar, 4 grams net carbs, packed with 17 grams of protein in there. And the best part is all Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. Yes, 100% real chocolate. Low in calorie, high in protein. Replace all that junk food with Built Bars. Tons of different flavors to choose from. Mint brownie, coconut almond. I can't even name all of them. Go check them out on their website right now, built.com. Use our promo code LOCKED15. That's going to get you 15% off your order. Use the promo code LOCKED15. Get 15% off over at built.com. Continuing on with our buddy Dan Mathews of the Chuck Oliver Show in Atlanta, and of course talking all things SEC. Let me get a thought, Dan, on the Tennessee Volunteers. I mean, Hendon Hooker, the more and more we start to hear and look at, I mean, this guy is set up for a monster season. I know they like some of the pieces back at wide receiver with the Vols, but in your opinion, like, how dangerous can this Vols offense be?
I think they can be dangerous. I think kind of like we were talking about with Arkansas is that they could be a team who is going to be improved. Now, I don't necessarily know if that's going to show up in the wins. People I talk with, they feel really good about that offensive line. As we've seen programs who have tried to get their footing back in the SEC, it's usually if you start to improve on the offensive and defensive line play, then you give yourself an opportunity to be competitive. Now, are they anywhere close to being what Georgia is right now? Probably not. That's probably a few years of really strong recruiting and development away. But in terms of, everybody talking about who's the second best team in the SEC East, I mean, a lot of people are saying Kentucky. A lot of people are even throwing Tennessee in there as a possibility. I mean, I think that's more or less just a, questioning of what Florida has in the first year of Billy Napier. But, when you've got a guy like Hendon Hooker back who had an outstanding season last year and seemed to fit very well in Josh Heupel's offense, I think kind of like I said, that Tennessee could be one of those teams that later on in the season you see on your schedule and say, this could be a tough one, either at Neyland or at your place. So I think that's a possibility. The only concern I have is twofold with them. I think, number one, I think depth is still a little bit of an issue with them, especially on the defensive side. I mean, I remember, talking with somebody last year that covers the team, and they talked about just the lack of depth that they had at linebacker. I don't necessarily think that is improved this year. But also, too, I think the other part of it as well is that last year, I think they kind of had a little bit of what Arkansas had in year one at the beginning of the season when Arkansas was playing teams tough and having a really good season, is that you're not going to surprise people anymore. I mean, especially with Hendon Hooker on the field, I think that that's going to be the thing that when they see you on the other sideline as Tennessee, people are going to say, yeah, hey, that's a team that can beat us. So we can't take this team lightly. But you definitely have to be encouraged if you're a Volunteer fan in the progress of this program. I think that, it was one of those things that recruiting was always there with Butch Jones. I just think the problem was with Butch Jones, he didn't win the games that he needed to win. And also, too, people got tired of his greeting card statements. It doesn't sound like you get a lot of those from Josh Heupel. So I think when you're all ball and you're not, brick by brick champions of life and all these different types of things, that people will be a little bit more patient with you. It seems like I said, the greeting cards, the statements painted on the wall, the T-shirts, all that kind of Pete Carroll-like stuff. It works when you win. When you don't and you lose to Alabama, Georgia, Florida, schools like that on a regular basis, seemingly the patience runs thin with your optimism.
Yeah, that's why everybody was bringing up Brian Harson's elevator signs. When you start to stink, everybody doesn't like any of that kind of stuff. Let me get a thought on Alabama, Dan, because, the more and more I start to look at their roster, I have major concerns about this offensive line. I mean, it's crazy thinking just 2 years ago, you had Evan Neal, you had all these great offensive linemen, and now you got a lot of unknowns. Emil Ekiyor is really good, but the fact that they're hosting a Vanderbilt transfer in Tyler Steen and hoping that he comes in, I think he will help them. But man, when you just say that sentence, Alabama's hosting a Vanderbilt offensive lineman, hoping he'll transfer in to help them, just kind of shows maybe some of these 4- and 5-star guys have not lived up to what they hoped they would be. They may get there, but I'm just wondering if Heisman Trophy winner Bryce Young's looking back going, man, guys, I need a little bit of help here.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has to be a concern. I mean, we saw the Iron Bowl last year. I mean, the adjustments they had to make in the second half in order to be able to give themselves a fighting chance. And then, of course, it carried over into the SEC championship game. But then in the national championship game, Georgia made adjustments defensively and were able to get to Bryce Young. So it has to be a little bit of a concern. I'm with you on that. Across the board, though, with this Alabama team, you've got pretty much every single top-tier player returning. You add Jermaine Burton. You add Jahmyr Gibbs, who I got to see a lot of when he was at Georgia Tech. And just I think he was definitely a huge fish in a smaller pond in that regard, where I think Georgia Tech could have used him a lot more. Now, would that have kept him at Tech? I don't think so. I think that he probably realized his final likely season of college football could be better benefited by playing at a program that he might have a chance to win a national title and raise his profile even higher. Jermaine Burton, let's face it, he's at Alabama because he didn't get enough catches at Georgia. I'll just go ahead and say it. And that's one of the things I talked about earlier with Georgia and, wanting to raise their profile of recruiting. I think that soon enough, Kirby's got to show, hey, touches are here. Now, for the longest time, Georgia had that problem at tight end. They kind of seemed to fix that last year. It's only going to be able, time will only tell
if they can fix that at receiver. At Alabama, they fixed that a long time ago. I mean, even with Amari Cooper there, after that, I mean, you have, Calvin Ridley, you have Jameson Williams this past year, who I think had 15 total touches his entire career at Ohio State. And then he comes to Alabama and became the player that he was last year. So touches are there. If you're a top-tier receiver, they can find you in that offense. And I think that they've proven that. And also year two of Bill O'Brien. I think the other part of this as well is that the revenge tours at Alabama usually hit. Both times that they've lost in the national title to Clemson, they've come back and they've been even better the following year. I mean, we saw them miss out on 2019 as kind of an example that goes against that a little bit. But then when they completely missed out on the college football playoff altogether, what did they do the following season? Oh, they just went out and had one of the best seasons, shortened seasons in college football history. And then, Nick Saban, I point to this as well, is that Nick Saban has a purpose to everything that he does. And I guarantee you that kind of the smirk he had when he shook Kirby Smart's hand and said, "You kicked our ass in the fourth quarter," I guarantee you that smirk completely went off his face as he turned around and started walking to his locker room. And that was bad news for the players in that fourth quarter program, because if there's one thing we know about Alabama is motivation is king in that building. And I guarantee you that's being reminded to those guys during these spring and summer workouts of, yeah, hey, remember how cool that was to just get completely manhandled in that fourth quarter? We're not going to let that happen this year. So they've got tons of talent returning. Offensive line, yes. I mean, we hadn't even talked about the fact they lose Evan Neal from last year's team. So an offensive line that wasn't all that great. You still lose a top tier player off that position group. So, it's going to be interesting to see, just how quickly they can come together as a group. But in terms of buying this roster top to bottom, there's no reason to believe they're not the best team in the SEC heading into the season.
Yeah, and a quick note on Alabama, getting back to running the ball more dominant. Last year was only the second time in the last decade they averaged less than 5 yards a carry out of the running back spot. So that's pretty crazy. Alabama, we're not used to that number. It's usually dominance in the run game. Last thing for you, Dan, and I'll ask you this because you're wearing an LSU shirt today. Who's going to win this quarterback battle at LSU? Because, man, I was all aboard the Miles Brennan hype train. I thought it was going to be his job. And then in comes Jaden Daniels from Arizona State, and we got a legit quarterback competition now.
Yeah, I believe Brian Kelly when he says that it is legit quarterback competition, because I don't think that you're just going to give away opportunities to people and just say you are the guy, and then you have the other guy transfer out. I think that he is going to give them these 15 practices, the spring game, and then you're probably going to see a decision made by somebody coming out of spring practice. I think that with Brian Kelly, look at his history at the quarterback spot. He likes players that fit the mold of what Jaden Daniels does. I mean, going back to Malik Zaire, going back to Everett Golson, Ian Book, even most recently. I mean, Jack Cohn was kind of the quarterback that went against, the mold of quarterback that Brian Kelly has seemingly had in his offenses. Brandon Wimbush as well, another quarterback that he's had in his offenses, the dual threat style that they bring. But Jaden Daniels, I think if he proves that he can be an effective downfield passer, then he definitely has a leg up in this position, because I think the other part of this as well, Chris, is that there's a little bit of buyer beware with the quarterback spot in terms of Miles Brennan, because I think that Brian Kelly looks at the opportunity that Brennan has in front of him and says, okay, talent is there. Yes, all the accolades coming out of high school. Finally got his shot, got hurt, missed most of that season, missed all of last season, and now is coming back after almost not playing quarterback in 2 years. I think that kind of scared him a little bit. So I think that he felt like he needed to at least give himself every opportunity at that spot. And then you're going to have players transfer out. That's going to happen. You can't worry about that anymore, especially at the quarterback spot. Now, I think that it's pretty much of what we've seen at Georgia a few years ago, where Kirby Smart realized I cannot have enough good quarterbacks in this quarterback room. At Texas A&M this year, I think that's another one too, that Jimbo Fisher realized after last season, having to rely on Zach Calzada. He said, yeah, right, I'm not going to have that again. I'm going to go out and get Max Johnson. I'm going to bring in Connor Weigman, and we're going to see what Haynes King has at the quarterback spot. I'm not going to have to rely on a freshman walk-on quarterback if indeed we do play the bowl game. They didn't play the bowl game, but the point is that coaches are deathly afraid of not having enough good depth at that spot. And I think that Brian Kelly was preemptive in terms of saying, yeah, I'm going to give myself every opportunity to have a top-tier guy taking the field when we take on Florida State Labor Day weekend.
One of our favorites to visit with, talking all things SEC, our buddy Dan Mathews. You could follow him on Twitter at Dan Mathews ATL. And you still got the podcast going too, right? The Southern Beat?
I do have the Southern Beat podcast going. So this week, we're going to go a little bit later on in the week just because of the broadcast schedule here at 6 a.m. The Fans. So Adam Spencer, Saturday Down South, he is going to join us. He is a huge basketball guy, of course. A little event happening in New Orleans on Saturday. I'm sure people have heard of it, called the Final Four, and that's going to be
no, we haven't heard of it, Dan. There's no SEC teams.
There's no SEC teams in it, but we can still watch good basketball. Blue Bloods across the board in this one, and we finally get Duke, Carolina in the Final Four, so that'll be fun to see. But have him on and trying to work on one more guest as well. But Friday, early afternoon, you will get a show.
Well, we certainly will keep an eye on that. Great stuff last week with Matt Moscona and Braden Gall and all these different guests you've had. Really, really cool checking that out. And, hey, basketball's not dead yet in the SEC. We got A&M. Go win us an NIT, A&M, all right? That could certainly happen. Dan, appreciate the time as always, man.
Always good, Gordy.
All right, that's Dan Mathews. You can follow him on Twitter at Dan Mathews ATL. Always appreciate him talking all things SEC with us. And that is just about going to do it for this edition of Locked On SEC. Appreciate you guys listening to us and making us your first listen every day. Now you can make your second listen. Check out the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast. Ryan Tracy and Eric Crocker bringing the NFL Draft to life, breaking everything down with all the draft analysis you need, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Chris Gordy. Thanks so much for listening to Locked On SEC. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow.